The Harrington estate sat on 14 acres of manicured perfection in the hills above Malibu, California, its white marble facade catching the Pacific sunrise like a polished mirror. From a distance, it looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of place ordinary people photographed from tour buses and posted to social media, with envious captions. But inside those walls, behind the 12-foot mahogany doors and the museum-quality art collection, lived a man who hadn't laughed in years. Ethan Harrington was 33 years old and worth $4.7 billion, a number that financial publications threw around every few months when they needed to illustrate the staggering gap between the ultra-wealthy and everyone else. He had built his empire from a single algorithm he'd coded in his college dorm room at MIT, a predictive logistics software that had quietly revolutionized how the world moved its goods. By 25, he'd sold his first company for $600 million. By 30, he'd leveraged that into a diversified empire spanning tech, real estate, and clean energy. By 33, he had everything the world told a man he should want. He had nothing he actually needed. Ethan's mornings were surgical in their precision. He rose at 4:47 a.m., not 4:45, not 5 o'clock, but 4:47, a habit so embedded in his nervous system that his body no longer required an alarm. He ran 6 miles on the treadmill overlooking the ocean, showered in water calibrated to exactly 98.6 degrees, drank a protein shake his nutritionist had assigned to the calorie, and sat at his desk by 6:15 a.m. with the cold efficiency of a machine that had long since stopped expecting anything to surprise it. His staff moved through the estate like ghosts, trained, through years of his exacting standards, to be present without being intrusive, to anticipate without being presumptuous, to serve without ever accidentally becoming human to him. There were 7 full-time employees managing the estate, plus additional contractors who came and went. They knew the rules. No personal conversations. No emotional entanglements. No questions that weren't directly related to their duties. Mr. Harrington paid exceptionally well, twice the market rate for every position, and in exchange, he expected the kind of invisible professionalism that left him alone with his work and his silence. The silence, for a long time, had felt like control. His closest friend, Marcus Webb, who ran his philanthropic foundation and had known Ethan since their sophomore year at MIT, had sat across from him at dinner 6 months ago and said something that had lodged itself, uninvited, in Ethan's chest like a splinter he couldn't reach. "You've built walls so high, man," Marcus had said, swirling his wine with the casual honesty that only decades of friendship permitted, that even the light can't get in anymore. "I'm not worried about your portfolio. I'm worried about your soul." Ethan had deflected with a joke and changed the subject. But in the weeks that followed, he'd noticed, really noticed for the first time in a long time, how quiet the estate was. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. The kind that echoes back at you in the middle of the night and asks uncomfortable questions. He had been engaged once, 3 years ago, to a woman named Celeste who was brilliant and warm and laughed at things with her whole body. She had tried, genuinely and patiently tried, to find the man she'd fallen in love with beneath the layers of ambition and control and emotional unavailability that his success had slowly calcified around him. When she finally left, she hadn't been cruel about it. She'd simply said, "I can't spend my life knocking on a door that's never going to open, Ethan." He'd nodded, helped her pack, and gone back to work within the hour. He told himself the numbness was strength. He'd been telling himself that lie for so long it had started to feel like truth. It was on a gray Tuesday in late October when a cold marine layer had rolled in off the Pacific and wrapped the estate in fog that his housekeeper-manager, Donna, knocked on his study door at precisely 8:30 a.m. to deliver an update he hadn't expected. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Harrington." Donna was 62, efficient, and understood his preferences better than almost anyone. I wanted to inform you in person because I felt it warranted a conversation rather than an email. Our primary cleaning coordinator, Patricia, had a family emergency last night. Her mother suffered a stroke. She'll need at least 3 weeks of leave. She paused. I've already arranged a temporary replacement to begin this morning. Her name is Sophia Reyes. She comes with excellent references and has been fully vetted. There is, however, one circumstance I need to make you aware of before she arrives. Ethan looked up from his monitor, already recalculating the logistical disruption in his head. What circumstance? She has a 3-year-old daughter, Donna said carefully. The child's daycare center has a temporary closure due to a plumbing emergency, 2 to 3 days at most. Sophia was unable to secure alternative childcare on such short notice, and given the urgency of our need, I took the liberty of telling her it would be acceptable for the child to accompany her today. The little girl's name is Lily. Donna held his gaze steadily, clearly prepared for his refusal. I will completely understand if you'd prefer I find another arrangement, but I wanted to be transparent with you. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Ethan Harrington, who ran his estate like a corporation and his emotions like a classified document, felt something shift imperceptibly in the air, something so small he would not have been able to name it if someone had asked. He attributed it to the fog, to the unusual disruption to his morning routine, to nothing at all. Fine, he said, returning his eyes to his monitor. Keep the child out of my study and away from the East Wing. I don't want the disruption. Of course, Donna said. Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Harrington. She closed the door softly behind her. Ethan pulled up his first meeting of the day, a video call with his Singapore partners about a clean energy acquisition that would reshape Southeast Asian infrastructure, and did not think another moment about the woman named Sophia Reyes or the 3-year-old daughter named Lily. He did not think about them at all, until 20 minutes later, when he heard it, drifting faintly down the long corridor outside his study like something from a world that operated by completely different rules than his own. It was laughter. Small, bubbling, completely unself-conscious laughter. Small, bubbling, completely unself-conscious laughter. The kind that exists only in the vocal cords of a child who has not yet learned that the world might give her reasons to be careful with her joy. Ethan Harrington sat very still at his desk for a moment, his fingers hovering above his keyboard. And then, because it was easier and safer and more familiar than anything else, he turned up the volume on his headset and went back to work. But the laughter, somehow, followed him in. Sophia Reyes had learned early in her life that you could measure a person's character not by what they said in their brightest moments, but by what they revealed when they thought no one important was watching. She'd grown up in East Los Angeles, the youngest of 4 children born to parents who had immigrated from Oaxaca, Mexico, with $40 and an absolute, unshakable belief that hard work was a kind of prayer, the most honest kind, the kind that didn't require translation. Her father had driven a delivery truck for 21 years. Her mother had cleaned office buildings 5 nights a week and still managed to have dinner on the table before her children left for school in the morning. Sophia had grown up watching her parents pour themselves into other people's spaces, making them clean, making them orderly, making them beautiful, and had absorbed from them a conviction that there was profound dignity in the work of caring for the world that others lived in. She was 28 years old, and she was tired in the particular way that single mothers of young children are tired. Not broken, not defeated, but carrying a kind of bone-deep weariness that she'd learned to wear so naturally that most people didn't see it. She had a degree in early childhood education from Cal State LA that she'd completed in fragments over 5 years, taking 1 or 2 classes a semester while working, and she had been 3 months from beginning a preschool teaching position, when everything had come apart. Daniel had left when Lily was 7 months old. Sophia rarely talked about it, because there wasn't much to say that the situation didn't already say for itself. A man who discovered that fatherhood required more of him than he'd expected and chose to minimize his losses. He wasn't cruel, wasn't absent in any formal or dramatic sense. He sent money sporadically and texted on Lily's birthday. He was simply fundamentally unwilling to stay. Sophia had cried for 60 days. Then she'd looked at her daughter, 7 months old, all dark eyes and soft cheeks and the specific, devastating smallness of a baby who depends on you for every molecule of her continued existence, and decided that grief was a luxury she'd have to schedule carefully. She had rebuilt her life around Lily with the same quiet determination her mother had built everything around her children. She cleaned houses, she picked up catering shifts on weekends, she saved aggressively and spent minimally and created, out of the arithmetic of her own exhaustion and love, a life that was genuinely good even when it was genuinely hard. Their apartment in Culver City was small, a one-bedroom where Lily slept in the bedroom and Sophia slept on a pull-out couch she'd bought secondhand and reinforced with a memory foam topper, but it was theirs, and it was clean, and every Saturday morning they made pancakes together, and Lily stood on a step stool and stirred the batter with more enthusiasm than technique, and it was, in those moments, enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Lily was 3 years and 2 months old, and she was extraordinary in the way that children are extraordinary when they've been genuinely loved, not just cared for, not just housed and fed, but actually, intentionally loved. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn dimples and a personality that seemed to have been assembled from pure light and forward momentum. She talked constantly, long, elaborate monologues about things she'd seen and things she'd imagined and things she'd decided were true through the sheer authority of her own conviction. She was afraid of thunder, but fearless about people. She had a stuffed elephant named Gerald who accompanied her everywhere and received daily briefings about the state of Lily's emotional and intellectual life. She was, as Sophia's mother said every time she saw her granddaughter, a little soul that came into this world already knowing things. Sophia had not wanted to bring Lily to work today. She had spent 3 hours the night before calling every person she trusted, her mother, her sister Carmen, 2 friends with flexible schedules, before exhausting every option. Her mother had a doctor's appointment she couldn't reschedule. Carmen was in San Diego for work. Her friends, both working mothers themselves, had conflicts she couldn't ask them to navigate for her sake. By 11 p.m., she had been sitting at her kitchen table with Lily asleep on the pull-out couch beside her, staring at Donna's text explaining the urgency of the situation, feeling the specific, familiar anxiety of a woman whose life operated with zero margin for error. She'd called Donna at 7 in the morning, ready to apologize and decline, to find another way, to make it work somehow, without complicating a new employer's expectations on her very first day. But Donna had been unexpectedly warm, had said the words "it's already handled," with the kind of authority that brooked no argument, and Sophia had packed Lily's backpack with her coloring books and crackers and Gerald the elephant and her small portable DVD player loaded with her current obsession, a British animated series about a rabbit family that Sophia had now seen collectively more times than she could count, and told her daughter they were going to a very big, very beautiful house, and that Lily needed to be her very best self today. Lily had considered this information seriously, the way she considered all important information. "Will there be dogs?" she asked. "I don't know, baby." "I hope there's dogs," Lily said, and picked up Gerald and was satisfied. The estate had stopped Lily's running commentary the moment they turned through the gates. Even at 3, the child could recognize something that operated on a different scale than ordinary life, and she had gone uncharacteristically quiet as the main house came into view, her small face pressed against the back window of Sophia's 7-year-old Honda Civic. Mama, Lily said softly. I know, Sophia said. Is a king live here? Sophia had almost laughed, the first real, unguarded laugh she'd had in days. Not a king, baby. Just a man. Donna had met them at the service entrance with warmth and a tote bag filled with age-appropriate toys that she'd apparently assembled from some hidden domestic reserve, which told Sophia everything she needed to know about the kind of professional Donna was. She'd walked Sophia through the day's requirements, deep cleaning the West Wing, the formal dining room, 3 bathrooms, and the guest suite currently being prepared for a visiting business associate, and assigned Lily a designated area in the staff break room with a clear view of the kitchen so Sophia could check on her easily. For the first 90 minutes, it worked perfectly. Lily colored. She ate her crackers. She narrated elaborate adventures for Gerald the elephant in a running whisper that made the estate's part-time chef, Jorge, stop what he was doing twice to grin. She was, by every measure, the very best version of herself. And then she went to find her mother. It wasn't defiance. Lily didn't operate in defiance. It was simple, pure, toddler love. She had finished her coloring book. Gerald needed to show Mama the picture they'd made, and the logic of 3-year-old navigation led her quietly, confidently, and completely incorrectly down a corridor she had not been assigned to, deeper into the East Wing than anyone had intended, until she pushed open a heavy door that had not been fully latched and found herself standing in the most serious-looking room she had ever seen. And in the most serious-looking room she had ever seen, at the most important-looking desk she had ever seen, sat a man who looked like he had forgotten, somewhere along the way, that the world contained people like her. She considered him for a moment with the frank, unhurried assessment of a child who has not yet learned that staring is rude. Then she walked over to him, reached up, and pressed her small, warm palm against his cheek. Ethan Harrington had been in the middle of a sentence. Not a spoken sentence, a mental one, the kind that existed only in the precise, structured architecture of his working mind, built from numbers and projections, and the particular language of financial modeling that had been his native tongue for so long that he sometimes thought in spreadsheets before he thought in English. He had been calculating the risk coefficient of a leveraged position in a renewable energy acquisition, a number that had been living at the edge of his attention for 3 days, a problem he was 45 minutes from solving when the door to his study swung open and his entire reality quietly rearranged itself. He heard her before he saw her. The soft pad of small feet on the hardwood floor, a sound so far outside the acoustic vocabulary of his normal day that for a fraction of a second his brain simply didn't categorize it as real. He registered it the way you register a bird calling outside a window during an important phone call. Noted, filed, returned to later. Then he heard breathing. Close. He turned from his secondary monitor. She was standing approximately 18 inches from his chair, holding a stuffed elephant to her chest with both arms, and looking at him with the large, luminous, completely undefended eyes of someone who had not yet accumulated reasons to guard herself against the world. Her hair was dark and pulled into 2 imperfect pigtails that suggested her mother had done her best with a 3-year-old who probably had opinions about the process. She was wearing small overalls over a yellow shirt with a daisy on the pocket, and she had a small smear of orange crayon on her left cheek that she was entirely unaware of. She regarded him with absolute composure. Ethan stared back. His brain, which processed 50 simultaneous variables in his professional life without breaking stride, came to a complete stop. He had not been alone in a room with a child in. He genuinely could not calculate the last time. His sister's kids at Christmas, maybe 3 years ago. He had no framework for this. He had no protocol. He had nothing in his considerable repertoire of responses for a 3-year-old standing 18 inches from his $15,000 office chair looking at him like he was a mildly interesting but ultimately comprehensible feature of her world. Before he could speak, before he could formulate the perfectly calibrated, pleasant but firm response that would return order to the situation, she moved. Not with hesitation, not with the tentativeness of a child uncertain of her welcome, but with the specific, pure confidence of someone who had not yet learned to doubt her own impulses toward human connection. She took 2 steps forward, lifted her small right hand, and pressed her palm flat against his left cheek. Her hand was warm. It was very warm, the kind of warmth that is specific to small children, that comes from some interior furnace of aliveness that adults have dimmed in themselves without realizing it. Her palm was soft in the way that nothing in his daily life was soft. Not the Italian leather of his furniture, not the Egyptian cotton of his sheets, not the engineered materials of the expensive world he had built around himself. It was the softness of something that had not been handled by commerce, that existed entirely outside the economy of acquisition and exchange. She kept it there. Not for a fraction of a second, for a sustained, unambiguous moment, the way a child touches something she has decided deserves her full attention. Ethan Harrington did not move. He didn't know why he didn't move. He would examine this later, much later, in the quiet of 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come and the question of that moment would present itself again with the patient insistence of something important. He was not a person who froze. He was not a person who was at a loss. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals and stood in front of congressional committees and navigated the specific predatory complexity of rooms full of people who wanted to take things from him, and he had never, not once, simply gone still and let the world do what it was doing to him. But he went still. He let her small hand stay against his cheek. And in the 5 seconds that followed, something happened in his chest that he did not have language for. A crack, a shift, the sound a frozen thing makes when something warm finds the edge of it. She tilted her head slightly, studying his face with an expression of thoughtful evaluation. "You sad," she said. It was not a question. His voice, when it came, was not the voice he used for anything. It was smaller. "What?" She patted his cheek once, gently, like she was confirming something she'd already decided. "You got sad eyes." She looked down at the elephant in her other arm with casual authority. "Gerald got sad eyes one time. I hold him a lot, and he was better." Ethan stared at this 3-year-old child who had wandered into the most guarded room in his life and diagnosed him in 11 words, and felt something completely outside his control happen behind his sternum.
"Who are you?" he managed.
"Lily," she said, with the confidence of someone whose name is a complete and sufficient answer. Then, because her social obligations in that direction were satisfied, she held up the stuffed elephant. "This is Gerald. You want to see your desk?" Ethan looked at Gerald the elephant. Gerald looked back with the expression all stuffed animals share, the slightly cross-eyed, permanently affable gaze of something that has absorbed enormous quantities of love. "He can see the desk," Ethan heard himself say. Lily immediately took this as an invitation, which it was, even if Ethan hadn't fully registered giving it, and moved to stand beside his chair, holding Gerald up so the elephant could examine the monitors and the papers and the expensive chaos of a billionaire's working life. She narrated quietly to Gerald and the patient, thorough way she narrated everything, explaining what things were with a confidence that bore no relationship to whether her explanations were accurate. "That's a big TV," she told Gerald, referring to his primary monitor. "And that's papers. Papers are important. Mama always do papers too." She surveyed the room with the proprietary satisfaction of someone completing a tour she'd organized herself. "He got a lot of chairs," she told Gerald approvingly, "in case lots of people want to sit." Ethan watched her. He watched her the way you watch something that has wandered in from a world you forgot existed, not with the vague, obligatory warmth that adults perform around children in social situations, but with something rawer and more involuntary than that. Something that recognized her without knowing why. It was at this moment that the door, which had been nudged further open by a draft from the corridor, fully swung wide, and Sofia Reyes appeared in the doorway. The expression on her face moved through several stages in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, horror, and then the careful, professional composure that she deployed over all of it like a drop cloth over something valuable. She was wearing a pale blue uniform shirt, and her dark hair was pulled back, and she was holding a cleaning cloth and staring at her daughter standing at the desk of Ethan Harrington with the specific, paralyzed expression of a woman watching her professional life flash before her eyes. Lily. Her voice was quiet and controlled, and entirely terrified beneath the control. Come here right now, please. Lily turned, saw her mother, and beamed. Mama, I found a man. His name is... She looked at Ethan with sudden uncertainty. What your name?
Ethan, he said.
Ethan, Lily reported to her mother with satisfaction. He got sad eyes, but Gerald and me are helping. Sofia closed her eyes for one small, overwhelming second. Then she opened them and looked directly at Ethan Harrington, not the practiced, deferential gaze of an employee who has made a catastrophic error and is calculating her next move, but a real look, the kind that comes from exhaustion stripping away the buffer between your insides and your face.
I am so sorry, she said.
I cannot tell you how sorry I am. It won't happen again. I'll take her right now, and if you want me to leave, I completely understand. She said I have sad eyes, Ethan said. Sofia went quiet. He looked at Lily, who was watching him with Gerald pressed to her chest, steady and unhurried, and absolutely certain of her assessment. He looked back at Sofia, who was watching him with the expression of someone who is trying very hard to read a situation that doesn't have clear rules. Does she want to see the ocean? He said. There's a window at the end of the East Hall. You can see all the way to Catalina on a clear day. Sofia opened her mouth.
Closed it.
We shouldn't. It's a clear day, Ethan said. And that was how Ethan Harrington, who had issued a standing rule against emotional disruptions in his personal space, walked a 3-year-old girl and her stuffed elephant to the window at the end of the East Hall and watched Lily press her entire face against the glass and gasp at the ocean like it was the most extraordinary thing she'd ever seen, which, for her, it was. Behind them, Sofia stood in the hallway, holding her cleaning cloth, watching her daughter and this man in the same frame, and felt something she couldn't quite name settle in the air around them like light. In the 3 days that followed Lily's daycare reopening, Ethan found himself aware of an absence he hadn't anticipated. This was unusual. Ethan was not a man who noticed absences. He noticed inefficiencies, gaps in data, underperforming variables. These were absences with mathematical identities, things that could be located and addressed. But the particular quiet that settled over the East Wing after Sofia finished her temporary assignment and returned to the staffing agency, after the small sound of Lily's running narration no longer drifted intermittently through his corridor, after Gerald the elephant's imaginary adventures ceased to serve as counterpoint to his conference calls, that kind of absence didn't have a number attached to it, and so he did the only logical thing. He ignored it. He was very good at ignoring things. He'd built an entire life on the architecture of strategic non-noticing, not seeing the look on Celeste's face the night she realized she'd lost him, not seeing the concern behind Marcus's jokes, not seeing the way his staff watched him sometimes with something that wasn't quite pity but lived in that neighborhood. He'd gotten so proficient at not seeing that it had begun to feel like a skill, even a virtue, the focused man, undistracted by the messy peripheral noise of emotional life. But Lily's hand on his cheek had left something behind. Not a physical sensation. The warmth had faded before she'd reached the corridor door. Something else. Something he kept noticing in the corners of his thoughts, The way you keep seeing the afterimage of a bright light when you've looked at it too directly. She'd said he had sad eyes. He'd been having his picture taken since he was 26, when Forbes first listed him on their 30 under 30. Hundreds of photographs, the kind where professional photographers spent 20 minutes adjusting his positioning and the lighting and the angle until everything was calibrated for maximum impressiveness. His eyes in those photographs were described variously as focused, intense, visionary. No one had ever said sad. No one had ever said it the way she'd said it, either. Not as criticism or pity, but as simple, factual, loving observation. The way you'd tell someone they have a leaf in their hair. He called Donna on Wednesday morning. The cleaning coordinator. The temporary one. Sophia Reyes. He paused, not entirely sure what he wanted to say next. Is she still available through the agency? Donna, who had worked for Ethan for 6 years and understood his communication style the way a translator understands subtext, said simply, I'll check on her availability. Patricia's recovery timeline has shifted. It's looking more like 4 to 6 weeks rather than 3. That's a long time without a full team, Ethan said. It is, Donna agreed. If Ms. Reyes is available and the quality of her work was satisfactory, which it was, it makes logistical sense to continue the arrangement. It does, Donna said. There was nothing in her voice to indicate that she understood precisely what was happening, though she absolutely did. If the childcare situation arises again, he said, and he paused for a long moment, it doesn't need to be a problem. The silence on Donna's end lasted exactly 2 seconds, which for Donna was the equivalent of a lengthy editorial response. I'll let her know, she said. Sophia returned on Thursday. She brought Lily because the daycare, in the way of institutional things, had resolved one problem by creating another, a staff rotation issue that reduced their available spots for the week, and Lily's slot had been bumped. Sophia arrived at the service entrance with the same careful professionalism she'd shown the first day, but there was something different in the set of her shoulders this time, less the tightly managed posture of someone bracing for judgment, and more the posture of someone who had been told and cautiously allowed herself to believe that she was actually welcome. Lily, for her part, walked through the service entrance with the settled familiarity of someone returning to a place she'd already cataloged and approved. She had Gerald. She had her backpack. She had her coloring books and her crackers and her portable DVD player. She also had a drawing she had made for Ethan. I made it yesterday, she told Donna seriously, holding up a piece of construction paper covered in vigorous crayon work that featured what might have been a person, what might have been an ocean, and a yellow sun that took up fully a third of the available space. In the lower corner, Sophia had clearly helped her write for Etten in purple crayon. She made him do the spelling, Sophia told Donna quietly, in a tone that combined maternal pride with mild mortification. I'll make sure he gets it, Donna said. The drawing sat on Ethan's keyboard at 6:15 a.m. when he arrived at his study. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at it. Then he picked it up and held it in a way that a man who is trying to appear unaffected does when he is not, in fact, unaffected. He propped it against the base of his monitor, where his eyes would pass over it 40 times a day.
He did not analyze why.
The new routine established itself with the organic logic of things that are simply right. Sophia worked through the estate with quiet competence and something that went beyond competence, a genuine attentiveness to spaces, an understanding that the way a room is cared for communicates something about how much the person living in it is worth caring for. She noticed things that previous cleaners had overlooked, not from incompetence but from the difference between someone doing a job and someone who understood that the job mattered. She replaced the flowers in the study with a fresh arrangement without being asked, selecting white peonies from the estate greenhouse that were not on the prescribed rotation but happened to be at peak bloom. She reorganized the kitchen pantry with a logic so intuitive that Jorge the chef called it the first time this pantry has made sense in 4 years. And Lily, with the specific, cheerful anarchy of a 3-year-old in a space that had finally, reluctantly decided she was allowed, slowly, incrementally, began to leave her mark on the Harrington estate. Not a mark of mess or carelessness. Sophia was meticulous about that, and Lily had been raised to respect the difference between spaces that welcomed her play and spaces that didn't. But a mark of presence. Of life. The drawing on Ethan's monitor. The small handprint in the condensation of the kitchen window that Jorge didn't wipe away. The sound of her reading aloud to Gerald from a picture book in the staff break room, her voice carrying the specific music of a child who has been read to so much that her understanding of narrative prosody is already sophisticated. Ethan began timing his coffee breaks differently. He didn't admit this to himself consciously. He was capable of extraordinary self-deception when required, but he began taking his mid-morning coffee in the kitchen rather than his study, at the precise hour when Lily was typically in the adjacent break room. He told himself it was about the natural light. The kitchen had better natural light in the morning. It was an ergonomic choice. On the third day of this arrangement, he walked into the kitchen to find Lily sitting on the counter. Sophia must have lifted her up, eating apple slices and conducting a complex negotiation with Jorge about whether grilled cheese was an appropriate pre-lunch snack. She was arguing her case with genuine rhetorical sophistication, citing multiple precedents from her home kitchen and invoking Gerald's apparent dietary preferences as supporting evidence. Ethan poured his coffee. Ethan. Lily spotted him immediately, with the unerring radar that children have for adults who belong in their narrative. Tell Jorge that grilled cheese is a breakfast food too. It's got egg. Sometimes. Grilled cheese doesn't have eggs, Ethan said. Lily looked at him. Reconsidered. Sometimes people put eggs in it, she said with only slightly less confidence. That's a breakfast sandwich. It's basically the same. Ethan looked at Jorge. Jorge's expression indicated that he had been enjoying this argument enormously and was delighted to have reinforcements on both sides. I'll allow it, Ethan said. Small one. Lily's face broke into a grin of such complete, unguarded triumph that Ethan had to turn back to the coffee maker and stand very still for a moment, doing something that his face didn't do often enough to have kept the muscle memory sharp. He was smiling. He stood at the counter and drank his coffee while Lily ate her negotiated grilled cheese and told him about a dream she'd had about a purple horse, and Ethan Harrington, who had 14 meetings that day and a board presentation on Friday and an acquisition timeline that was 17 days behind schedule, stood in his kitchen at 10:30 in the morning and listened to a 3-year-old describe a purple horse with more attention and presence than he'd brought to almost anything in years. It happened on a Thursday evening in mid-November, when the Pacific storm that meteorologists had been tracking for a week finally made landfall with the specific, dramatic thoroughness of something that had been building pressure for too long and was finally letting go. Ethan had kept Sophia and the maintenance crew later than usual, managing the estate's preparations, securing outdoor furniture, checking drainage systems, ensuring the generator was ready for the power fluctuations these storms routinely caused along the coast. By the time the rain started in earnest, at a few minutes past 5, it had become immediately clear that driving the canyon roads in a 7-year-old Civic in a storm of this severity was not a safe option. Ethan had said this to Donna, who had relayed it to Sophia, who had stood in the service entrance looking at the sheeting rain and the bending eucalyptus trees along the drive, and agreed with a composure she clearly had to work at. "You'll stay in the guest suite," Ethan said. He said it the way he said operational decisions, with the simple authority of a determination already made, already logistically resolved. "It's prepared. There's a pull-out bed in the adjoining sitting room for Lily. Donna will make sure you have everything you need." Sophia had looked at him for a moment. Not the careful, professional gaze she typically deployed, the real one, the unguarded one she'd shown him in the doorway of his study the first day, when exhaustion had stripped the professional buffer away. "That's very kind of you," she said. "It's practical," he said, and turned and walked back toward his study before either of them had to spend more time than that in the exposed territory of the exchange. He'd intended to work through the evening as he always did during storms. They didn't affect him. The estate was designed to remain fully functional regardless of weather, and he'd long since learned to appreciate the enforced stillness of a storm as productive working time. He had his Singapore call, his board summary, and 3 contracts he'd been meaning to review. He'd gotten through 1.5 contracts when he heard it. It was not Lily's laugh this time. It was Lily's cry, the specific, frightened cry of a child who has been woken by something terrifying, the kind of crying that doesn't build gradually but arrives at full intensity, raw and immediate and impossible to compartmentalize. A crack of thunder. One of those concussive, house-shaking ones that feel less like weather and more like something structural giving way, had detonated directly overhead, and Lily, who was afraid of thunder and was 3 years old and in an unfamiliar room, responded to it in the only way available to her. Ethan was out of his chair before the sound fully registered in his conscious mind. He didn't examine that. He simply moved. He was in the corridor when he heard Sophia's voice, low and warm and steady, the voice of a woman who has learned to be someone's whole safe world, saying, "I'm here. I'm right here. Baby, Mama's here. The thunder is just the sky being loud. It can't come inside. We're safe. We're so safe. Mama's got you." And even through the door, even at the remove of the corridor, it reached into Ethan's chest and took hold of something. He stood outside the guest suite door. He didn't knock. He stood and listened to Sophia talking her daughter back from terror with a patience and a steadiness that had no reserve clause, no calculation of cost, no limit that he could detect. And he thought about what it would be like to be loved like that. To have someone whose first and last and only response to your fear was simply to move toward you. To be there. To be enough. He thought about his own mother, who had been warm but distant in the way of women who have learned to manage enormous households with the precision of field generals and who lose the softness sometimes in the efficiency. He thought about the particular silence of his childhood bedroom during storms, not frightening, not safe, just neutral, just himself and the sound of rain against glass and the independence that he had taught himself to call strength. He thought about Lily's hand on his cheek. He thought, "I have been alone in this house for a very long time." Another crack of thunder. Lily's crying, which had been subsiding, spiked again. Through the door, he could hear Sophia's continuous, patient, unwavering voice, and beneath it now, something else. Sophia's voice was entirely steady, but there was something in the texture of it, some barely perceptible thinness, that told him she was working very hard to keep it that way. That she was tired in a way that went beyond this evening. That she was a woman who had been someone's whole safe world for 3 years with no one to be that for her, and she was doing it beautifully, and she was exhausted. He knocked softly. A pause. The crying continued. "It's Ethan," he said. I don't know. I just wanted to check if everything was okay." Another pause. Then the door opened. Sophia was holding Lily against her shoulder, the child's face buried in her mother's neck, her small back heaving with the aftershocks of frightened crying. Sophia's hair, usually neatly pulled back, was loose, and she was wearing the kind of expression that people only have when they've stopped managing how they appear. She looked young. She looked tired in that specific, beautiful, bone-deep way. She looked exactly like what she was. "She's okay," Sophia said. Her voice was steady. "She's just scared of the thunder. I've got her." "I know you do," Ethan said. He looked at Lily, who had turned her head slightly at the sound of his voice, her crying already decelerating, her dark eyes finding him over her mother's shoulder with that frank, assessing look she brought to everything, reddened from crying but still, underneath it, herself. "Hi," he said to her. She blinked. Her lower lip trembled once, then steadied.
Thunder is loud, she said.
It is, he said. Very loud. And then it's over, and then it's quiet. It scared me. I know. He crouched down to her level, the way he'd seen Sophia do, so she wasn't looking up at him. It's allowed to scare you. And then your mom holds you, and you're safe. Right? Lily looked at her mother. Sophia looked at Ethan, and something moved through her face that she couldn't close the door on in time. Right, Lily said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Ethan with renewed purpose. You don't got anyone to hold you when it's loud? The question entered him like something quiet and devastating, the way the most important things arrive. Not with drama, not with warning, but with the simple, unstoppable accuracy of truth aimed by someone too young to know they're aiming. He opened his mouth.
Closed it.
Not right now, he said. Lily reached out, the same unconscious, undefended gesture of that first morning, and patted his face with her small hand.
Once.
Firm. Decisive. You can sit with us, she said. Mama don't mind. Do you, Mama? Sophia's eyes were bright, and she was very still, and she said, in a voice she had to work to make even, no, Mama doesn't mind. Ethan Harrington sat on the floor of his guest suite with his back against the bed, and Lily climbed off her mother and settled herself in the space between them with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child who has identified where she is supposed to be. She held Gerald. She listened to the thunder. She listened to the rain. After a while, she fell asleep. That sudden, total, unqualified unconsciousness of young children, completely surrendered to trust. And in the quiet that the sleeping child created around her, Ethan and Sophia talked. They talked for 3 hours. Not in the careful, bounded way of employer and employee negotiating the terms of a professional relationship, but in the raw, unguarded way of two people who have found themselves, unexpectedly, in a real moment and have decided, separately, simultaneously, to be real in it. He told her about Celeste, about what Marcus had said about walls and light, about his mother's house during storms and the particular silence of rooms where no one runs toward you. He told her about the night he'd sold his first company, how he'd been in a hotel room in San Francisco, alone, how the wire confirmation had come through at 11:47 p.m., and he'd looked at the number and felt nothing. How that nothing had frightened him more than anything in his life. How he'd gone to the minibar and had a drink and called no one and gone to sleep. Sophia listened the way she did everything, with full, genuine attention, the kind you feel in the quality of another person's silence. And then she told him about Daniel, about the 60 days of crying and the 7-month-old face that had ended them, about the step stool and the pancakes and the pull-out couch and the way Lily said "Mama" in the middle of the night sometimes, not frightened, just checking, just making sure the center of her world was still there, and how it was the best and most completely sufficient sound she had ever heard. She's extraordinary, Ethan said. He meant it without qualification. She is, Sophia said. A pause. She saw something in you that first morning. She kept talking about you that evening. She said you looked like you needed someone to talk to. Ethan was quiet for a moment. She was right, he said. Outside, the storm continued its long and necessary work, clearing the air of everything that had been accumulating too long. December arrived at the Harrington estate the way it hadn't in years, with actual decorations. Not the tasteful, professionally arranged holiday installations that Ethan had approved annually from a distance, a wreath on the front door, white lights along the drive, a Christmas tree in the foyer that was beautiful and entirely uninhabited. Those still went up. But this year, in the kitchen and the east corridor and the staff break room, there were also paper snowflakes taped to windows at 3-year-old height, a construction paper chain in alternating red and green that looped along the kitchen cabinets, and a small clay ornament in the shape of something that might have been a star, or might have been Gerald the elephant. The artist herself insisted it was both. Hanging from the handle of the refrigerator with a piece of yarn. The estate felt, for the first time in Ethan's memory of living in it, like somewhere that people actually lived. The formal conversation about Sophia's employment had happened in the first week of December, after Patricia, fully recovered, grateful, and absolutely sincere in her appreciation of Ethan's generosity during her family emergency, returned to her position. Ethan had called Donna into his study and told her, with the same operational directness he brought to all decisions, that he wanted to create a new permanent position, estate manager of daily operations, a role that consolidated several functions that were currently fragmented across multiple part-time arrangements, that came with a salary that made Donna's eyebrows rise very slightly, and that had been designed, in every particular, to fit the specific skill set and circumstances of Sophia Reyes. And the childcare situation, he added, with the careful neutrality of a man who has rehearsed his nonchalance, can be accommodated permanently. I'll have the carriage house guest room fitted out as an appropriate space for Lily on the days when her daycare placement isn't available. There's no operational reason it should remain unused. Donna had looked at him for one long, warm, professionally controlled moment. I'll extend the offer, she said. Sophia had asked for 24 hours to think about it, which Ethan had granted, and during which he had been, by his own internal assessment, unusually aware of the passage of time. She accepted the following morning in a brief, professional email that said everything it needed to say in its final line. This position would change our lives, and I want you to know that I understand exactly what you're offering and why, and I won't take it for granted. Ever. He read that line 3 times. Then he replied, "Good. Neither will I." The thing between them grew the way real things grow, not in declarations or dramatic moments, but in the accumulated weight of ordinary ones. In the coffee that appeared on his desk at 6:15 a.m. prepared exactly as he liked it, not because it was in Sophia's job description, but because she'd noticed. In the conversation he sought out most mornings in the kitchen, which no longer pretended to be about the natural light. In the Saturday in mid-December when he was in his study and heard, from somewhere in the house, the particular domestic chaos of pancake making, Lily's running excited commentary, Sophia's patient instruction, the metal clink of a bowl, a small crash followed by laughter instead of tears, and found himself pushing his chair back, standing up, walking down the corridor, and appearing in the kitchen doorway where neither of them had asked him to be, and being welcomed like he had always been. Exactly there. "You make pancakes?" Lily demanded, pointing the wooden spoon at him. "I don't know how," he said. Lily's expression communicated that this was both surprising and correctable. "Mama will teach you," she said with absolute authority, already moving her step stool over to accommodate a third person at the counter. Sophia looked at him across the kitchen island with an expression that had entirely stopped trying to be professional. It was the look she had when she was simply herself, which he had come to understand was the greatest thing she could offer anyone. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he said. He moved to the counter. Lily immediately positioned him at the bowl and handed him the wooden spoon with the gravity of someone transferring significant responsibility. "You stir," she told him. "But not too fast, or it gets on your shirt and Mama gets sad." "Important to know," he said. He stirred. Lily supervised with maximum engagement. Sophia stood beside him and occasionally corrected his technique, and their arms crossed twice, and neither of them moved away. Outside the kitchen windows, December light lay across the Pacific in long gold stripes, and the house, the big, marble, 14-acre house that had been built for impressiveness and had achieved only emptiness, made the sounds of somewhere that held people who were glad to be there. Marcus came to the Christmas dinner. He sat across the table from Ethan in the formal dining room, which had been formally set by Sophia and informally disrupted by Lily, who had insisted on making place cards and had spelled Marcus as Marcus, and had drawn a small elephant next to each nameplate as what she called decoration, and everyone else called the most purely wonderful thing they'd ever seen at a dinner table. Marcus looked at the place card, looked at Lily, who was across the table explaining to Ethan that she'd given his place card the biggest elephant because he was the dad one. Looked at Sophia, who was passing the bread basket and smiling at something Lily had just said with the particular warmth of someone whose life, on this specific evening, feels exactly the right size. Looked at Ethan, who was listening to Lily with his full attention, who was leaning slightly toward the conversation with a body language that had shed decades of careful distance, whose eyes were lit with something Marcus had not seen in them in so long that he'd begun to wonder if it had been lost permanently. His eyes were not sad. Marcus picked up his wine glass. He caught Ethan's gaze for a moment across the table, and what passed between them was the wordless, comprehensive communication of people who have known each other long enough that language is mostly ceremonial. Ethan held the look, then looked back at Lily, who was now explaining to Jorge, who had joined them for dinner at Ethan's explicit invitation, why Gerald the elephant should have his own chair. After dinner, when Lily had fallen asleep against Ethan's arm on the couch and Sophia had gone to the kitchen with Jorge and Donna, Marcus sat beside Ethan and looked at the sleeping child. "She's the one who did it," Marcus said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "She put her hand on my cheek," Ethan said. His voice was different when he talked about it, quieter, with the texture of something handled carefully. "The first morning. I don't know why I don't know how something that small." "Because small is what gets through," Marcus said. "You'd spent 15 years sealing up everything that could be taken from you. She didn't knock on the door. She just came through the one place you forgot to fortify." Ethan was quiet. Lily shifted slightly in her sleep, burrowing toward the warmth of his side with the total trust of a sleeping child, and he adjusted his arm automatically, and the gesture was so completely natural, so entirely unself-conscious, that Marcus felt something enormous and good happening in real time. "I'm going to ask Sophia to dinner," Ethan said. "Just dinner. Properly." "You eat together every day," Marcus observed. "Properly," Ethan said again, and Marcus understood the distinction and let it stand. The invitation, when it came, was not the practiced, confident move of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. It was given at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning in the week after Christmas, with a mug of coffee in each of their hands and Lily in the break room telling Gerald about a book she'd received for Christmas, her voice carrying through the open door with its usual joyful authority. "I was thinking," Ethan said, looking at his coffee, "dinner. The two of us. Saturday, if Lily's at your mother's. There's a restaurant in Santa Monica that," he stopped. Started again. "I'd like to take you to dinner." "That's what I mean." Sophia set her coffee down. She had been waiting for this, not with strategy or anticipation, but with the patience of someone who has learned to trust that the right things announce themselves when they're ready. She had felt it accumulating for weeks in the 10,000 small moments of a shared life being quietly built, the way he looked for her in rooms, the way she'd started arriving each morning with the particular expectancy of someone who can't quite contain how glad she is about where she's going. "Yes," she said. He looked up. She was smiling. Not the contained, professional smile, not even the warm and open smile she'd gradually stopped hiding. This was the one underneath all of those, the one that was just hers, unperformed and complete. "Okay," he said. He exhaled something he'd been holding for weeks. "Good." From the break room, perfectly on cue, Lily's voice drifted through the doorway. "Gerald," she was saying, "I think Mama and Ethan are going to be friends forever. I can tell because he got happy eyes now." Ethan and Sophia looked at each other across the counter of his kitchen, with the December light coming through the windows and the sound of their daughter, of Lily, their Lily, who had walked through an unlocked door and put her hand on a sad man's face and simply, irrevocably changed everything, narrating the state of the world to her stuffed elephant, and both of them laughed. Really laughed, with their whole bodies, with nothing held back, with the sound of people who have found something they didn't know they'd lost. The end.